Most people think lying is a moral flaw. They're wrong. It's a psychological survival strategy. And once you understand this, you'll never see honesty the same way again. Lying isn't about being bad, broken, or manipulative. It's about protection, about a mind that learned, often very early, that truth can be dangerous. Somewhere along the way, the brain made a quiet deal with itself. If hiding keeps you safe, then hiding is worth it. And that deal still runs your behavior today, even when you swear you value honesty. Here's the uncomfortable, almost controversial truth. Most lies are not told to deceive others. They're told to regulate fear, protect identity, and avoid emotional pain. That's why intelligent, kind, well-intentioned people lie more often than they admit. Not because they want control, but because their nervous system learned that truth once came with consequences. This video isn't about judging lies. It's about decoding them. Because the moment you understand the psychology behind deception, you gain something rare. Clarity. Clarity about your ego, your fear, your shame, and the silent patterns running your life. And more importantly, clarity about how to stop lying without forcing yourself, by removing the need to lie. What you're about to hear explains why honesty feels threatening, why lies feel relieving, and how freedom begins the moment the mind no longer needs a mask. He knows this already, even if he's never put it into words. Most lies aren't born in darkness, they're born in fear. Somewhere early in life, the mind learns a quiet lesson. Truth can cost you safety. So a mask is crafted, not to manipulate, but to survive. In psychology, this is self-protection wearing a human face. A child hides a mistake to avoid punishment. An adult hides emotions to avoid rejection. Over time, lies stop feeling like choices and start feeling like reflexes. The ego steps in, whispering, "Just smooth the edges, it's safer that way." And before he notices, deception becomes a language he speaks fluently, not proudly, but automatically. Think of it like armor forged too early. Armor saves you in battle, but wearing it to bed slowly breaks your spine. That's how the mind treats lies. At first, they defend identity, shield shame, and soften fear. But later, they restrict movement, honesty, and emotional breathing. He tells himself a small lie at work to keep peace, another at home to avoid conflict. None of them feel evil. In fact, they feel reasonable. The brain rewards the relief, reinforcing the pattern. Psychology doesn't judge. It records what reduces pain, and the mask, once useful, becomes glued to the face. Here's where it gets subtle. The mask isn't only for others, it's often for the self. He edits his own story to stay functional. "I'm fine. It doesn't bother me. That's just how I am." These aren't statements of truth. They're negotiations with fear and shame. The ego protects identity like a fragile glass sculpture. Any crack feels catastrophic. So honesty feels risky, almost reckless. In this space, lies don't feel like betrayal. They feel like maintenance. The mind convinces itself that deception keeps life running smoothly, like oil in a noisy machine. A practical example makes this painfully clear. Imagine someone who grew up being criticized every time they spoke honestly. As an adult, they smile, agree, nod along, even when it costs them internally. Ask them what they want, and they hesitate. Not because they don't know, but because truth once led to pain. A simple practice begins to loosen the mask. Low-risk honesty. Start small. Admit preferences in safe spaces. Say "I don't know" instead of improvising. Notice the body's reaction. Tight chest, quick breath, and stay present anyway. Books like The Courage to be Disliked or Man's Search for Meaning help reframe identity beyond approval and fear. And here's the quiet tension he can't ignore forever. Every mask creates distance. Distance from others? Yes. But more dangerously, distance from the self. Living behind lies fragments identity, splitting who he is from who he presents. It works, until it doesn't. The exhaustion creeps in. The sense of being unseen grows louder. Something inside him begins to ask for alignment, for truth that doesn't need armor. That question lingers unresolved, pulling the mind toward the next realization. What fear is really protecting, and why it still holds so much power. Fear doesn't knock on the door. It sneaks in through the nervous system. Before logic has time to speak, fear has already made a decision. In psychology, fear is fast, ancient, and persuasive. It scans for danger, rejection, abandonment, loss of status. And when it senses a threat, it doesn't ask what's right, it asks what's safe. That's where lying begins, not as a moral failure, but as a survival shortcut. The mind says, just say what keeps you intact, and the mouth follows. In that moment, honesty feels like standing exposed in a storm without shelter. Fear has a talent for exaggeration. A single bad outcome becomes a lifelong rule. He told the truth once and paid for it, was laughed at, punished, dismissed, so the brain recorded a warning. From then on, fear whispers predictions. If you're honest, you'll lose love. If you're honest, you'll lose control. These predictions feel real because the body reacts as if danger is present. Heart rate rises, muscles tense, thoughts race. Under this pressure, a lie feels like relief. The psychology is simple. Fear narrows perception, and deception looks like the nearest exit. Picture fear as an overprotective architect. It designs lies like emergency tunnels, quick, hidden, effective in the short term. Say you're busy, pretend you didn't notice. Act confident even if you're not. These structures work at first. They reduce anxiety, preserve identity, and avoid confrontation. The ego applauds the efficiency, but no one asks what living underground does to the soul. Over time, these tunnels become permanent housing. He forgets what daylight honesty feels like, and fear becomes the default decision-maker. A real-world example makes this tangible. Someone fears being seen as incompetent, so they exaggerate achievements at work. Each lie lowers immediate anxiety, but increases long-term pressure. Now they must remember stories, maintain appearances, and protect a fragile identity. A simple counter-practice exists. Name fear silently before speaking. This urge to lie is fear, not truth. Then pause for 2 seconds. Often that's enough to choose a softer honesty, not brutal truth, just accurate truth. Books like Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway or Atomic Habits help retrain the brain to tolerate discomfort without escaping into deception. Here's the unresolved tension that pulls him forward. Fear promises safety, but slowly steals freedom. Each lie strengthens fear's authority, teaching the brain that truth is dangerous. Yet somewhere inside, a quieter awareness grows. The suspicion that fear isn't protecting life anymore, only protecting old wounds. And once that suspicion appears, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who inside is so desperate to be protected, and what role the ego plays in keeping that illusion alive? The ego doesn't announce itself. It negotiates in whispers. It isn't evil or arrogant by default. It's defensive, strategic, and deeply invested in survival. In psychology, the ego's primary job is to preserve identity. And when identity feels threatened, truth becomes negotiable. He doesn't lie to deceive others as much as he lies to protect the story of who he believes he is. The ego says, if they see this flaw, I disappear. So reality gets edited, softened or rearranged, not dramatically, just enough to stay intact. Think of the ego as a museum curator of the self. It selects which pieces are displayed and which are hidden in storage. Successes go under bright lights. Failures are quietly removed. Shame becomes a restricted wing no one is allowed to enter. Lies, in this sense, are curatorial decisions. They preserve an image, not necessarily the truth. The brain cooperates because identity feels like oxygen. Threaten it, and panic follows. So deception becomes an unconscious alliance between fear and ego, working together to keep the self-image stable. This is why lies often sound reasonable inside the mind. I didn't really care anyway. That's not who I am anymore. They wouldn't understand. These phrases aren't malicious. They're protective spells. The ego fears collapse, so it avoids contradiction at all costs. If new information threatens the identity, it gets distorted. Psychology calls this cognitive dissonance, but lived experience calls it exhaustion. Maintaining a polished identity requires constant energy. Every interaction becomes a performance, and every performance increases the distance from authenticity. A practical way to loosen the ego's grip is to separate who you are from what you do. When mistakes happen, name the behavior without attacking identity. Instead of "I'm a failure," say "that decision didn't work." Journaling helps here, specifically writing 2 columns, facts versus interpretations. This trains the brain to tolerate truth without ego collapse. Reading Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, or revisiting Napoleon Hill's ideas on self-mastery can recalibrate identity around growth, not perfection. And yet, a subtle discomfort remains. Even when the ego feels secure, something feels off, like living in a well-decorated room with no windows. The lies protect identity, but they also limit expansion. The question begins to form quietly. What is the ego actually hiding from? And what emotion taught it to become this vigilant? That question leads directly into the deeper shadow behind deception: shame. Shame is quieter than fear, but far more invasive. Fear reacts to danger. Shame rewrites identity. In psychology, shame isn't "I did something wrong," it's "there's something wrong with me." And once that belief settles in, honesty feels dangerous by default. He doesn't hide facts, he hides himself. Lies become curtains drawn not to mislead, but to avoid being seen too clearly. Shame teaches the mind that visibility equals vulnerability, and vulnerability once came with pain. Imagine shame as a stain the ego believes can never be washed out. Instead of risking exposure, the mind chooses concealment. This is where deception becomes habitual. He downplays needs, exaggerates strength, pretends indifference. The brain learns that hiding reduces emotional pain, so it reinforces the pattern. Over time, the person forgets what they're even hiding. The lie isn't about events anymore, it's about worth. Psychology shows that shame thrives in silence, and lies are its favorite accomplice. You can see this clearly in everyday life. Someone avoids admitting they're struggling financially, emotionally, or mentally, not because help isn't available, but because shame whispers, "You should be better than this." So they smile, joke, deflect. Social media amplifies this, rewarding curated identities and punishing raw truth. A practical step here is intentional disclosure in safe contexts. Choose one trusted person and share one honest struggle. Nothing dramatic, just real. This small act weakens shame's authority. Books like Daring Greatly by Brené Brown explore how vulnerability dismantles the psychology of hiding. Here's the paradox: shame creates. The more he hides, the heavier the burden becomes. Lies multiply, not because truth is unbearable, but because carrying the mask alone is exhausting. The ego keeps working over time, the brain stays alert, and the nervous system never rests. Integrity feels distant, almost mythical. Yet the body knows, tight shoulders, shallow breath, that something is misaligned. Shame promised safety, but delivered isolation. And beneath that isolation, another mechanism quietly takes over. The brain, ever practical, starts asking a different question. Not is this true, but does this reduce pain? When that question becomes dominant, a powerful neurological loop forms, setting the stage for the next realization. How the brain itself rewards lying, regardless of morality. The brain is not a philosopher, it's an accountant of comfort. It tracks what lowers stress, not what builds character. In psychology, this is simple conditioning. When a lie reduces tension, avoids conflict, or preserves identity, the brain releases relief. Relief feels good, so the behavior gets reinforced. No moral debate, no ethical pause, just cause and effect. Over time, honesty starts to feel risky, while deception feels efficient. The mind learns this works and repeats it. Think of the brain like a navigation app that recalculates based on traffic, not truth. If honesty leads to emotional congestion, arguments, rejection, discomfort, the system reroutes. Lies become shortcuts. They save time and emotional energy in the moment, but shortcuts often bypass essential terrain. He arrives faster, yes, but misses the landscape of real connection. The psychology here is subtle. Repeated relief strengthens neural pathways, making lying feel automatic, even necessary. A common example shows this clearly. Someone lies to avoid an awkward conversation. The relief is immediate. No tension, no confrontation. The brain rewards that outcome. Next time discomfort appears, the mind suggests the same solution. Soon, the lie happens before awareness kicks in. To interrupt this loop, a practical exercise helps. Delay the response. When the urge to lie appears, pause and breathe deeply for 5 seconds. This engages the prefrontal cortex, giving choice back to awareness. Reading Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman helps understand this automatic versus reflective mind. Here's where it gets tricky. The brain doesn't just reward lying, it penalizes truth if truth is paired with pain. That's why honesty can trigger anxiety. The body remembers past consequences, even if they no longer apply. So the person avoids truth not because it's wrong, but because it feels expensive. Over time, emotional numbness can appear. When everything is managed for comfort, growth slows. The ego stays safe, but the self stays small. And still, something feels off. Relief fades faster each time. The lies need to be bigger, smoother, more frequent. The brain keeps chasing comfort, but comfort never satisfies for long. That's when a deeper realization begins to surface. Lies aren't just avoidance, they're signals. Each one points towards something unresolved, something the mind doesn't want to face yet. And that realization opens the door to the next layer, what lies are really trying to confess. Every lie points at a truth standing quietly behind it. In psychology, deception isn't random, it's directional. What a person hides often reveals what they value, fear, or haven't healed. He lies about confidence because insecurity aches. He lies about indifference because attachment hurts. The lie becomes a shadow cast by an unspoken confession. If you know how to look, deception becomes a map, not a mystery. Think of lies like warning lights on a dashboard. They don't cause the problem, they signal it. But instead of checking the engine, most people just cover the light. The ego prefers silence to inspection, yet every repeated lie asks the same question: what truth feels too dangerous to name? The psychology here is revealing. What we avoid saying holds disproportionate emotional charge. That charge is where growth lives. A practical way to decode this is to reverse the lie. When you notice a pattern, ask, if this weren't true, what would be? If someone says, I don't care, the confession might be, I care deeply, and that scares me. Writing these reversals privately helps bring awareness without exposure. This isn't self-attack, it's self-study. Books like The Untethered Soul or Radical Honesty explore how truth releases trapped emotional energy. Here's the emotional tension. Lies demand maintenance. Confessions demand courage. One drains slowly, the other hurts briefly. But the mind, trained by fear and reward, chooses the familiar drain. Over time, this creates internal noise, a sense of fragmentation. Parts of the self want to speak. Other parts enforce silence. The result is restlessness, even when life looks fine from the outside. And once he sees lies as signals instead of sins, curiosity replaces shame. The question shifts from why do I lie to what is this lie protecting? That curiosity doesn't yet solve the problem, but it cracks the door open. Behind that door waits another illusion, the belief that lying gives control. And that belief is about to be challenged. At its core, lying is often an attempt to grab the steering wheel in moments of uncertainty. Control feels comforting, especially when emotions run high. In psychology, uncertainty triggers anxiety, and anxiety begs for management. He lies not to dominate others, but to manage outcomes, how he's seen, what happens next, how much pain he'll feel. The lie says, if I shape the story, I can shape reality. And for a moment, it almost feels true. Picture trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter the grip, the faster it escapes. That's control built on deception. Lies create the illusion of mastery, but they require constant pressure. Every interaction becomes a calculation. What did I say last time? What do they believe now? The mind stays alert, scanning for inconsistencies. Psychology shows that this hypervigilance increases stress, even when the lie works. Control gained through deception always comes with a hidden tax. You can see this in relationships. Someone lies to avoid conflict, believing they're keeping peace. In reality, they're postponing discomfort, not eliminating it. The unspoken truth doesn't disappear. It accumulates. Resentment grows quietly, connection thins, and authenticity fades. A simple practice challenges this illusion. Choose one low-stakes moment to relinquish control. Say what's accurate, not what's strategic. Notice that the world doesn't collapse. This experience rewires the brain's prediction system. Books like Nonviolent Communication help translate honesty into connection instead of conflict. Here's the deeper paradox. The more control he seeks through lies, the less control he actually has. The narrative owns him. He reacts instead of responds. Freedom shrinks to whatever the lie allows. Integrity, on the other hand, simplifies life. When truth is consistent, there's nothing to manage. The nervous system relaxes because there's no performance to maintain. Yet letting go of control feels like stepping into fog. The mind resists, asking, what if honesty costs me something? That fear hasn't vanished yet. It lingers, tugging him forward toward the next realization, the quiet but heavy price of living divided between truth and deception, and how that division slowly erodes the self. Living with lies doesn't explode life all at once, it erodes it quietly. In psychology, division inside the self creates constant friction. One part knows the truth, another performs the version that feels acceptable. He becomes two people in one body, the one who remembers and the one who presents. This split demands energy. The mind is always working, adjusting tone, filtering words, editing reactions. Over time, fatigue sets in, not physical tiredness, but existential exhaustion. Something feels heavy, even on good days. Think of it like running two operating systems on one computer. Both work, but everything slows down. Small decisions feel draining. Emotional clarity blurs. Integrity isn't about morality here, it's about alignment. When words, actions, and inner reality don't match, the nervous system stays tense. Psychology shows that this internal incongruence increases anxiety and decreases resilience. The body knows when something's off, even if the story sounds convincing. This division shows up in subtle ways. He laughs at jokes that sting, agrees with plans he resents, accepts labels that don't fit. None of this feels dramatic enough to confront, so it continues. A practical step toward integration is micro-alignment. At the end of each day, ask one question: where did I say yes when I meant no? Write it down without judgment. This practice trains awareness and slowly reunites the split parts. Reading Man's Search for Meaning again here reinforces how coherence gives life depth, even under pressure. Here's the emotional weight of division: loneliness. Even surrounded by people, he feels unseen. After all, how can someone be seen if they're not fully present? Lies create distance, not just externally, but internally. The self becomes a stranger to itself. This is why success without authenticity feels hollow. The achievement lands, but satisfaction doesn't. And eventually, a quiet longing surfaces, a desire not for perfection, but for wholeness. The mind starts craving simplicity, the relief of not managing two realities. That longing doesn't resolve yet, but it points forward toward a deeper truth. Why honesty feels dangerous to a wounded mind, and what healing actually requires. Truth isn't threatening by nature, it becomes threatening through memory. In psychology, the mind doesn't respond to the present. It responds to stored experience. If honesty once led to punishment, abandonment, or humiliation, the nervous system learned a rule: truth equals danger. So even safe situations trigger old alarms. He's not avoiding honesty because he's weak, but because his body is protecting him from a past it still believes is happening. Think of a smoke detector that goes off every time you make toast. It's not broken, it's sensitive. The wounded mind works the same way. Emotional scars tune the system too finely. When truth approaches, anxiety flares, heart rate spikes, and the urge to lie feels urgent. The ego steps in fast, offering safer scripts. Psychology shows that trauma compresses time. The past bleeds into the present, making yesterday's threats feel current. A practical way to soften this response is to separate past from present in real time. When anxiety rises around honesty, silently name 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear. This grounds the body in now. Then speak one honest sentence, not everything, just one. This teaches the nervous system that truth no longer equals harm. Books like The Body Keeps the Score explain how healing happens through the body, not just insight. Here's the emotional conflict. The mind wants peace, but only knows how to get it through avoidance. Honesty feels like reopening wounds, even when the wound is already healed. So the person keeps protecting what no longer needs protection. This is why growth feels uncomfortable. It contradicts old survival rules. But discomfort here isn't danger, it's recalibration. And once the mind begins to sense that truth doesn't always lead to pain, a new possibility emerges. Not immediately, not dramatically, but quietly. The idea that honesty might actually be restful, that truth could simplify rather than expose. That possibility opens the final door, leading to the last realization, where freedom truly begins and why lies eventually lose their grip. There's a moment, subtle but unmistakable, when the mind realizes it's tired of hiding. Not tired in a dramatic way, but in a deep cellular sense. In psychology, freedom isn't about saying everything. It's about not needing to manage who you are. When lying ends, energy returns. The brain no longer splits attention between reality and performance. He feels lighter, not because life is easier, but because it's simpler. Truth reduces friction. Think of honesty as putting down a heavy bag you forgot you were carrying. At first it feels strange, almost unsafe to walk without that weight. The ego resists, asking, "What if I need this later?" But step by step the body adjusts. Conversations feel cleaner. Decisions require less calculation. The nervous system rests. Psychology calls this coherence, when inner experience and outer expression align. Peace emerges not from control, but from consistency. This doesn't mean brutal honesty or emotional dumping. Wisdom chooses timing and tone. Freedom comes from accurate truth, not reckless exposure. A practical approach is value-based honesty. Speak what aligns with your values, not your impulses. If growth matters, say what supports growth. If respect matters, say what preserves dignity. Reading the Four Agreements reinforces how truth spoken with care strengthens relationships rather than damages them. The emotional reward is quiet but profound. Self-trust. When words match reality, the self becomes a reliable place to live. Confidence grows organically, not the loud kind, but the grounded kind that doesn't need validation. Lies collapse identity over time. Truth stabilizes it. The ego relaxes because it no longer has to defend a fragile image. And even here, the journey doesn't end. It opens. With lies gone, awareness sharpens. The mind becomes curious instead of defensive. Each honest moment becomes an invitation to live more fully, more consciously. That curiosity doesn't close the story, it keeps it alive. If this message landed deeply, it's because you recognized yourself somewhere along the way. That's not coincidence. That's awareness waking up. Understanding the psychological reason behind telling lies isn't about becoming brutally honest overnight. It's about noticing why the mind reaches for deception, what it's trying to protect, and whether that protection is still necessary. Real change begins the moment awareness replaces autopilot. Now the real work starts. Pay attention this week. Notice when a lie wants to leave your mouth. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of losing right now? Is it approval, control, comfort, or identity? And then ask the more powerful question, what would happen if I chose accuracy instead of safety just this once? You don't need to expose everything. You don't need to confront everyone. Start small. Speak one honest sentence where you'd normally hide. Admit one truth to yourself in writing. Allow one uncomfortable emotion to exist without escaping it. This is how integrity is rebuilt, not through force, but through consistency. And slowly, almost quietly, you'll feel it. Less tension, more clarity, a mind that doesn't need to rehearse stories to feel okay. So here's the challenge. What truth are you avoiding? And what is it costing you every day you keep avoiding it? Who could you become if you no longer needed the mask? If this video gave you insight, clarity, or even discomfort, that's a sign you're in the right place. Subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo and activate notifications to continue exploring the psychology beneath behavior, the silence behind thoughts, and the truths most people never stop long enough to face.